Hello.
Hey there.
How are you?
I'm good.
Steve. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Andrea.
Hello.
Hello, Fadi. Hello, Robert. And Melissa. Hello.
Hello, my friends. Hello.
Hello. Hello, Emil.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey there.
Hello, Melissa. Yeah, let me start sharing the agenda for today. And we have a project presentation scheduled for today for Tecton. So maybe let's wait another minute and then we can start. Hi, Christy.
Hello.
Welcome.
So, Andrea, I'm not sure if for purposes of this, I'm a technical oversight committee member or a project representative. Which would you like me to insert myself as?
I think a project representative.
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Okay, I would say let's get started. We had a few things on the agenda. So welcome everyone to the TOC meeting. Oops, sorry, today is March the 14th. I'm Andrea Frittoli, and feel free to sign yourself in the attendees list or mark your name in the TOC members and project representative. So just to start, wanted to quickly review action items from the last meeting. And then Fatih will talk about the demo theater, and then we have the first project update presentation of the year with Tecton. So thank you, Christy and David, for standing up for this presentation. And we have a few more items on the agenda. So let's get started. Action item I had Mark from last meeting. Shipwright project representative that was missing, so Enrique offered to be representative for the project, so he's added to the list there. And also I added the list of project representative for each project here to the TOC contributors. so that we have them tracked on the TSC GitHub repository. Okay, the other thing that we discussed about that I wanted to follow up, we discussed about 2 weeks ago, is the LFX tools working group. So thanks everyone who worked on setting this up. So there is a GitHub repository now with a README and governance and all the information in there. And also there is a Slack channel and mailing list available for the working group. Okay. So next, the demo theater at CityCon GitOpsCon. Fatih, you wanted to say something about this?
Yeah. Can you open that spreadsheet, Andrea? So I can walk through. So as we announced a few weeks ago, we are working on bringing up something we call Project Demo Theater, which will be placed in sponsor booth hall, and our projects could take 15 minutes and talk about their projects, like provide updates or call people to contribute. And this is like, you don't have to go through CFP process, but you can go in there and add your project and the title of your talk and who might be presenting directly to spreadsheet, and we can get that information added to schedule so you can go and present your project there. So this is one of the things we have there for our community, and it is first come first served. So whoever goes there can grab a slot for that. And the other thing we have is the CDF booth. If you can click the CDF booth, but yeah, thanks, Andrea. So we are looking for volunteers to, serve on the booth and, talk about CDF and their projects. So if you are interested in, helping our community and our projects, please sign up to the spreadsheet, and then you can work within the booth during the breaks and talk about your project or the community. And the third thing, which we are still working on, is Project Summit. And if you can click that sheet, thanks, Andrea. So we are also looking into possibility of giving rooms to our projects so they can meet with the community members, contributors, and interested individuals during the event and discuss their project, their roadmap, or other issues or topics they might have. And you can just sign up on this part, and then you can get the room, one of those rooms for your project during those time slots. As you can see, we have morning slots before the session start, lunchtime slot, so you can grab something to eat and meet with your fellow community members. Also for Tuesday, we plan to have a slot after the sessions are done. So if you are planning to host a project meeting discussion, you can sign up for these slots, and similar to demo theater and booth schedule, this is also first come, first served. And finally, the demo theater schedule and project summit schedule will be displayed on the official event schedule, so you can see and point your colleagues and friends to the schedule if they want to meet with the community and so on. Any questions? This has just become available. So if you can sign up for this, you can get the sessions listed on the schedule as quickly as possible. And any questions, just Slack us on CDF Slack as well. Assuming no questions, so thanks, thanks, Andrea.
Thanks, Fatih. Okay. Yeah, next on the agenda, I have the project update presentation. If that's a good time for you, Christy and David, to do the presentation.
I think so. David has the first slide, so it's up to you, David.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and present. Give me just a second, please.
Oh, I think you're muted.
David, you're muted.
So there is a checkbox when you start sharing. So if you stop sharing and start sharing again, just before you say OK, there is a checkbox that says something about sharing the audio of
Got
the
it.
screen.
Got it. Thank you very much. Okay, now I'm unmuted, correct?
Yes.
And you can see my screen. So we're in business. Hi. Sorry for you can't see my screen.
I can see that you started screen sharing, but it's all black, at least for me.
My end claims I am sharing in the little preview.
Can other folks see it, or is it just me?
I'm seeing the same thing, just a black screen saying,
Oh, there you go.
now I see the PowerPoint.
Okay. I don't know what was different. I changed slides and suddenly you could see. Sorry for the technical glitches. Let me start there. Quick introduction. My name is David Bendori. I am the engineering manager for the Tecton open source team here at Google. I'll let Christy introduce herself when we get there. I've got the first couple of slides. I'm going to be talking about the Tecton community roadmap. This was an effort that I undertook in Q4 to basically be forward-looking through 2023 as to what the different companies and contributors to Tecton had in mind. The full roadmap is available on GitHub. I'm certainly not going through the whole thing. These slides, will put a link in the doc if Christy didn't do that yet, and you can pick up the link from there. So at the top here, we've got the high-level community goals that we identified. Basically, one is community-based, since that's what all of OSS leans on. We want to encourage further Tecton adoption, add features, advance maturity, and then improve our own developer infrastructure and the developer experience in Tecton. Down the bottom there, I've got a list of people who effectively contributed to the content I'm going to share. These are all the people I met with when we were putting the roadmap together. And you can see a variety of companies and contributors there. So with regard to healthy community, it's really about how we govern ourselves and what our community standards are. We had an issue or two in 2022 where we were a little bit inconsistent around this sort of thing, and it created some friction that we'd like to avoid. So we're trying to be a little bit better about that in terms of how we self-govern, and then broad global representation, variety of companies, variety of industries, variety of backgrounds, etc. In terms of encouraging adoptions, really there are line items under each of these themes. So I'm just going to bring the themes here. Integrations are things like, well, I've got my source in GitLab, and how do I integrate GitLab and with Tecton? Or how do I use Artifactory or any other third-party tool you might want to use as part of your CI/CD? We'd like to collect some metrics around actual usage. We have a bit of a blind spot here, and we'd like to have some metrics around Tecton installations and what people are doing with Tecton and that sort of thing. That kind of user metrics would help guide our future development. One issue that came up last year, we've got a lot of practitioners who are using Tecton at scale and very little data around and benchmarking around that. So we want to get some information around that so we can give some guidance. And then finally, documentation is always critical. And in particular, we want to focus our documentation on kind of end-to-end user journeys. In terms of new features and advancing maturity, I'm just going to highlight the last bullet point there because Christy's going to talk about that in depth. Really, security is the ongoing story on everybody's mind in CI/CD. We talk about it all the time, and as you'll see, we have done a lot and are going to continue to do a lot in that particular space. And then finally, improving our own infrastructure. Basically, Tecton on Tecton is the theme. We want to spend more time dogfooding our own product, understanding it not only from a developer perspective, but from a user perspective. Christy, if you want to take over, you can do the screen share. I'm happy to stop, or I'm happy to page slides for you as you go. Just cue me.
Sure. Why don't I try to share my screen, see how it goes. One sec. Does it just take me a minute?
Looks good, Christy. Thanks. Christy, I have a feeling you made the same mistake I made. When you choose which tab to share, there's a little checkbox down the bottom that you need to uncheck. It says, I think, share audio from presentation or something like that. You need to uncheck that before you share your screen.
I think that the audio you missed was me lamenting how we don't get at Google, we don't get enough exposure to Zoom, so we have no idea what we're doing. Let me try again, I guess. Oh, share.
It seems
share.
like a pretty bad default value for that check. Anyway.
Yeah. Wait, okay, is it working? Is everything working now?
It is.
Yes,
Okay, you
you're
can
good.
see my slides. Okay, all right, great. So I'm Christy Warwick. I used to be Christy Wilson. You might know me as Christy Wilson. I've been working on Tecton since the beginning. I'm an engineer at Google, currently still leading Tecton efforts at Google, but also focusing a lot more on secure supply chains in general. So I wanted to talk to everyone here today a little bit about some of the things that we're working on in Tecton around secure supply chains, and especially a call out to anyone working on other projects that are also working on particularly complying with SALSA, or maybe interested in consuming the provenance that we're going to be generating with Tecton, because I think it's important to make sure that all these tools work together. So there's some interesting, I think, opportunities for collaboration there. I'll get into a bit more detail about what I mean. So I'm going to be talking mostly about SALSA. We are working on supply chain security in general, but there's a lot of different aspects, and the way that we're tackling it right now has been through the lens of SALSA. The high-level themes of SALSA are around generating provenance, the isolation of the build system, and the integrity of source. I'm going to get into more detail about all of those. So first, what am I talking about when I'm talking about provenance? You may have heard this term before. Also, everyone on the call might be completely familiar with this. It'll only be a brief overview just in case. I also find myself getting confused because the terms attestation and provenance seem to be used interchangeably. I've found it helpful to try to think about this in the context of things outside of software, like because provenance and attestation are both terms that mean something in other domains. So one, for example, is in the domain of art. You're talking about a painting. The provenance of that painting is the traceable evidence of where the painting came from and how it exchanged hands along the way and how it came to be where it is. And that's similar to the provenance that we generate about software, which is how did we get this piece of software, this binary, how was it built, where did it come from? And then similarly, there's attestations, which you can have all kinds of attestations about anything, really. I can attest that I'm standing in my office in my house right now. You can have an expert who attests to a painting and says, I've examined this, I see based on the paint that was used in the analysis of the paint that this was painted at this time and painted by this person. And that's an attestation. So you can have all kinds of attestations. So usually when we talk about provenance, it's a kind of attestation that we make about software. For example, an image, we can make provenance. We can attest to the provenance of that image and how it was built. So a big piece of complying with SALSA for Tecton is being able to generate this kind of provenance for artifacts that Tecton builds. Looking more at SALSA specifically, another big piece of SALSA is around requirements on the build system. So there's provenance generation, as I was just talking about. There's different levels for that. The first level, the bare minimum, is that you make the provenance. The next level is that the provenance is authentic. So you've actually, I believe it comes down to signing it and being able to verify those signatures so you know it actually came from where you thought it came from. And then the strongest level is that it couldn't be forged. So you know that the values that are inside of that provenance actually are what they say. So if the build system says, I built this image at this digest, then, and you look in the provenance and you see that, you know that is actually what occurred, at least as far as the build system can really know. The other big piece is around isolation. So making sure that different workloads that execute on the build system can't interfere with each other. If you're familiar with SALSA at all, you might notice that this is a slightly shorter list than some of the ones that you've seen previously. And that's because SALSA is coming out with a new version, 1.0, which actually scopes it down a fair amount. I'm going to touch on some of the other features that they've removed, at least for now, later. But initially, let's talk about how Tecton is trying to meet SALSA 1.0. So in the domain of isolated execution, we're doing pretty well with Tecton. Our unit of execution is containers, so that is already ephemeral. We can improve this, and we've seen some of our users, such as IBM, doing this by adding additional sandboxing, like they're using IBM is using Kata containers for execution, for example, so makes each container more like a lightweight VM. As far as isolation is concerned, like can different workloads interfere with each other? There are a few features of Tecton that make it so that you can violate that isolation. It kind of depends on how you use Tecton, basically. One feature of Tecton tasks and pipelines is that they can share data via something called a workspace. If you're not careful about how you set that up, that's a way to violate isolation, because you could have one workload that does something in a workspace and then another one that tries to use that and doesn't realize that it's been changed. Also, if you let people execute privileged workloads, which means that they would have access to the underlying node, then that's another way of violating isolation. So we can meet these requirements today, but it depends a bit on how people use Tecton. Basically, they have to set it up and configure it correctly. On the theme of provenance, as I was discussing before, today we, out of the box, using an optional Tecton service called Tecton Chains, you can meet the first two levels of SALSA. You can generate provenance and it'll be signed, so it'll be authentic. To meet the further non-forgeable requirement, we are integrating a project called Spire with Tecton. And so what this will do is it adds an extra layer of signing so that everything that Tecton claims has happened will actually be signed in such a way that we can verify that those values came from where we were expecting them. So here's kind of a brief overview of how provenance generation works in Tecton. In the kind of upper right side of the screen, there's a depiction of a pipeline. So this could be a typical pipeline of tasks. Pipelines and tasks are both Tecton terms, by the way. They're both reusable units. Tasks can be combined in pipelines. Here's a typical pipeline where somebody might be fetching source code, running tests on that source code, and then building an image from that. If we wanted to generate provenance for this, part of what's going to happen is that there's the fetch source code task will run. It uses parameters and workspaces and inputs, and it creates something called a result, which is basically just string values that it outputs. And then this optional component, Tecton Chains, observes that execution and generates provenance from that. So that's sort of at a high level how this works. I wanted to touch briefly on a few other features that we are planning in Tecton, which were initially part of SALSA, but have been temporarily descoped. So with SALSA 1.0, there's a number of requirements which I've listed here, which are being taken out of scope for now, and the plan is they're going to be brought back later. There used to be a SALSA level 4, for example, and that's not in the requirements right now, but my understanding is that they're planning to re-add it. And they're also planning to add a track to SALSA that's focused primarily on source, because there are a number of requirements, like every change to source code needs to be reviewed by 2 people that were very difficult to enforce in the previous model. Like, for example, Tecton would have no idea if the source code had been reviewed by 2 people. So I think that they're trying to figure out a way to focus on source and bring that back in. But we'll see what the implications are for Tecton and other build systems. But there's a few things that we think are likely to come back that we are already working on, specifically build as code, hermetic execution, and trusted source fetching, which I will get into a bit more detail about. So first, for build as code. So this is the idea. This is coming from infrastructure as code, from all the other as code initiatives. The idea being that the configuration you use to define your build processes is actually stored in version control somewhere. And when you're building an artifact, you're actually fetching that configuration from version control. So we added a feature to Tecton called remote resolution, which lets users specify tasks and pipelines that are either in version control, or we have another feature that lets you actually store them in OCI bundles. So we are already addressing build as code in Tecton via remote resolution. Another feature that's exciting that a lot of build systems don't seem to provide yet, which I think is part of why SALSA descoped it, because they seem to have trouble finding examples of this actually being used, is hermetic execution. So in Tecton, we actually have an experimental feature for hermetic execution, which drops network access to a pod. So you can run a task and you can say it should be hermetic, and then it will run with no network access. So that's something that exists as an experimental feature, and hopefully we can promote it to alpha and beta and so on in Tecton. And I think that we'll see some movement on this, and then also hopefully see the requirement come back into Salsa, but it's still very useful whether it's in Salsa or not. The last thing I wanted to touch on is a little bit, oh, let me see. Sorry, I don't actually haven't been paying attention to chat. Let's see. Hermetic means no access to the network. Yes, that is accurate. I think if you look at, I was going to say if you look at the Salsa requirements, but it's not in there anymore. At least in the previous Salsa requirements, they had a very specific definition of hermetic, and I believe it means that no. I think that part of what they ran into as well is they had another requirement, reproducible. So there's reproducible and there was hermetic, and it was sort of hard to draw the line between the two, because one way of defining hermetic was that if you ran exactly the same thing again, there's no outside influence on it, so you'd end up with the same thing, but then that sounds like reproducible. So network access isn't all that there is to hermetic execution. I think the idea was that nothing externally could but then I'm already talking myself into a box, because time is something that changes, and I believe that was explicitly outside of the scope of hermetic execution. The idea that if you built an artifact at one time and at another time, you'll actually end up with two different artifacts potentially. They could still be hermetic, but they're not reproducible. So it seems like network access is the main thing that hermetic execution boils down to, but there might be a bit more to it than that. I'm not sure quite where the line is between that and reproducible though. But happy to go into more detail about that as well, or I could look up the Salsa requirement. I think the last thing I wanted to talk about is it's primarily about trusted source fetching, which was the Salsa requirement. So Salsa had a requirement that when you're fetching source code to build an artifact, basically that's kind of a special operation, and the control plane that's doing it needs to be able to say, yes, this was the source code that was fetched. And most CI/CD systems have this built in, but if you're familiar with Tecton at all, Tecton is not very opinionated and it's very pluggable. So fetching source code is something that at the moment we kind of leave up to users to provide tasks that say how to fetch the source code. So what we needed in Tecton was a way to have tasks that are kind of part of the trusted control plane, so that we could have a way of fetching source in a trusted manner. And the way that we've been approaching that so far is with a feature called trusted resources. So the idea is that these reusable tasks and pipelines, instead of just saying, oh, a user can use any task or pipeline they want, we added the ability to have a policy that says, I think that this can evolve over time. At the moment, all that it says is, if you get a task or a pipeline from this particular place, so from this Git repo, for example, I expect it to be signed with this key. So this is a way of, at least we can say, when I'm running a source fetching task that comes from this particular location, I know that it was built by these people and hasn't been tampered with. And on top of that, if you combine that with the idea of a catalog, for example, the Tecton open source catalog, then you could see a path where people can publish catalogs of verified tasks and pipelines that kind of have more trust than just the user specifying a task or pipeline that they've written themselves. So between the catalog and then the introduction of the idea of trusted tasks and pipelines, we're hoping to kind of move some of the tasks into the trusted control plane. So the same pipeline that we were looking at before, where source code is fetched, if we're using trusted tasks and we're using a catalog, then what that can look like is that this task is stored in version, this task that fetches source code is stored in version control. There's people who are in charge of maintaining it. Whenever they make a change to it, they test it and then they sign it. And so when the actual pipeline executes and fetches this task, it can verify that the task was signed. And then we have at least somewhat more trust than just a random task that does source fetching. The very last thing I wanted to touch on is a feature that's in progress called Tecton artifacts. It's very early and we don't even really know what it's going to look like yet, but we basically need to solve the problem of how our provenance generator knows what's occurring. At the moment, Tecton chains, which makes provenance, looks at the execution of pipelines and tasks, and it basically looks for special string values, and that's how it knows, oh, these were the inputs and these were the outputs. So based on this special string value, I know that an image was built, so I'm going to make provenance for that image. And based on this other special string value, I know what source was used to build that image. So we're kind of we're encoding information about the artifacts that are being built into these strings. So instead of that, there's an effort to add first-class support for artifacts so that you can declare them a bit more explicitly. It'll be the same information, but in a more useful form. And then potentially we can have kind of a plugin mechanism around tasks that makes them puts a bit more control into the hands of administrators. So back to the trusted task for source fetching, maybe we can even have policies that say, whenever we're dealing with source artifacts, you should use this particular trusted task to fetch them. And then we could add more things on top of artifacts like caching and immutability. So the last evolution of that pipeline that I was showing you before would be that we have a way of declaring source code as an artifact in the pipeline. We have a trusted task for fetching that source code that's verified when it executes. We could have policies around what tasks can fetch source code. So that way we can have this piece of the trusted control plane that does source fetching or some other job, but then also have the pluggability and flexibility that Tecton provides. So that was a whirlwind overview of some of the security related features in progress in Tecton, specifically around Salsa. I included a link. There's a link to these slides in the notes for this meeting. That's currently shared with Tecton Dev though, because it's kind of hard to open these up to just anyone. We might want to just, David, we might want to just move this to one of our personal accounts, and then we could open the slides up to everybody. I also put a link to this case study that talks about how Tecton and Salsa work together, but it is based on the older versions of Salsa. So you'll see a bunch of stuff that isn't quite as relevant anymore.
Christy, I actually moved the slides to the Tecton folder.
Oh, that's an even better idea.
Yeah,
Then when you move them there, can you still open it up to everybody, or will it just be?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can make it public, which is kind of what we want, but I did link it in the doc, which told me who has access to the agenda for this meeting that couldn't access it, and I shared with all of them. So everybody here should be able to see it. We'd like to make it wider, but there are restrictions on us Googlers. So
sounds good. That was all I had for slides. Does anybody have any questions?
Great, thanks. Thanks a lot, Christy and David. See, Tracy, you have your hand raised. You have a question you'd like to?
Yeah. Hey, Christy, thank you for that. That was an awesome overview. Super excited about what you guys are doing around Salsa in particular. I just have a couple of questions or things for you to think about. Have you looked at, in terms of on the build side, have you looked at what Persia is doing around the decentralized package network?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's on our radar.
You might, these are other CDF projects. And I love that you're looking at Salsa as a kind of a standard for what you're doing. But it'd be great to also kind of think about some of the other CDF projects. And Persia is interesting because it's, you think about restricting network access for a build to make it hermetic and repeatable. Persia is sort of addressing that in a very interesting way, where it's both hermetic and repeatable because you're doing it across multiple nodes and not just trying to do it on a single node. And that means that all nodes have to agree that that build was correct before it is blessed, so to speak. And then I'd love to chat with you more about some of that provenance information that you are starting to grab, because Ortelius collects that data and snapshots that data over time with every release of a component and logical application. So that would be information that we might be pulling up. And then finally, it would be great if some of this stuff was built around CD events. The CD events is really trying to build out some standards and vocabulary around that. So if you could keep CD events in mind. So those would be the three other CDF projects that I think might want to have their head into what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I think maybe something that could be useful for Tecton to do at the very least would be to publish. We could publish or write something that shows sort of what information we're emitting. So you're mentioning like, is it way to wanting to kind of consume this data and maybe make some use of it? We could I think document clearly exactly what we're publishing and emitting. And I think, Andrea, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know that you've been looking into events with Tecton. I think we want to have CD events more integrated in Tecton as a whole. I think we're making some progress toward that.
Yes, so we have an experimental controller that produces CD events. And yeah, so the plan is to definitely evolve that into a core component. And I think going back to what Christy was saying, I mean, Tecton is pretty non-opinionated. So right now we know about tasks and pipelines, but the more we create structure around like artifacts or more structured information about provenance, then we will be able to produce even more, better events in a sense, or events that are more specific to things that are happening from a software supply chain point of view.
Thank you for your time and thanks for the feedback.
Great. Any other question? Comments?
So I had a sort of a general purpose question. Andrea, Christy and David did a great technical presentation, and this is the Technical Oversight Committee. A month from now, I'm doing a presentation and I've got a governance role, not just a technical role. Would this group prefer to hear a strong focus on technical, or do you want to hear the good and the bad of the governance side and the flaws and weaknesses, or the strengths and weaknesses of the Jenkins project? Should the next month's presentation that I do be biased strongly towards technical, the way Christy and David did, excellent technical material, or do you want, in addition to technical, some governance material? Some, hey, how's the project going? How's its health? What are the threats to it, etc.?
I like both personally.
I
was going
definitely
to
think,
say-
yeah, so sorry, Andrea. I think that some of the stats around the community, the involvement in the community, any threats that you see, I think would be very, very helpful to understand, do we have a community building issue on some of these projects? Are there just a couple of companies that are involved and not a lot of just general community contributors from the global community? Those kinds of things would be great.
Good. Okay, so you're okay if it's broader than technical. Great. I'll use that and shape it accordingly. Okay, thanks.
Mark, what would be useful to you?
Well, I'm going to prepare that material whether or not I present it here, because I've realized I need that material. Okay. So I was more interested in, if the rest of you want to hear my overview of, oh my sakes, I'm frightened by this, or oh, I'm really kind of proud of this, those sorts of things. If that helps you, I'm happy to share it. And if the techniques we're using to collect the information about the project help you, great. That was sort of my question, Robert, was if it's useful to you, I want to present it. If it's not useful, I do not want to bore you with things that I've gathered anyway.
It would absolutely be useful, Mark. And I think what Robert's getting at is we're here to help you. So if you tell us something that we can latch onto and get you some help with, like, for example, community building, like what Tracy mentioned, we have resources that we can put into play to help the project.
Oh, good. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So the last month's conversation about the LFX working group was a crucial one, right? Because I'm critically dependent on that data. I really need the data that the current DevStat site is doing. So I don't want to sacrifice that. And I'll happily talk to more topics next month when we gather.
And
thanks, Andrea.
Yeah, for Christy and David or anyone else who wasn't in 2 weeks ago in last meeting conversation about the LFX working group. So the idea is that we're starting a working group to discuss features that are interesting for projects or for the CDF community to have in the LFX tools. As there is a plan to sunset DevStat, we want to make sure that we have those features available in there that are needed by the project. So, and everyone is welcome to join the working group, of course, and share their opinion and needs there.
That's good to know. I feel like we still look at, I think just the other week I was looking at dev stats for some things. It's definitely important to be getting that data somehow.
And I wanted to link to something that you said, David, about learning more about what Tekton users, about who's using Tekton and downloads and usage and this kind of information. And I think in last meeting, we had some discussion about exactly this topic. Because as a TOC, I think we would be interested in learning from all the projects what the health of the community is and what the kind of usage is out there. So so let me share maybe the notes from last week. So right, we discussed assessing CDF project health in terms of project community metrics, and that links back to DevStat and the LFX working group. And the other aspect was really usage metrics. And there is a policy from the Linux Foundation about data collection. So that it's linked here if you want to look at the policy. The other thing that Mark mentioned is that Jenkins has been collecting this data anonymized for quite a few years now today. So I wonder whether there is some learning here, that maybe some experience that we could share and reuse across projects. I think it would be really good if we could enable all projects that are interested in collecting this information in an effective way and compliant with the policy as well.
Thanks for that guidance. We were actually aware of both the usage policy and that Jenkins has been collected. We actually looked at some of Jenkins as guidance, exactly as you're describing.
Just want to add to this, if I may. This topic came up during board meeting as well. So Mark, thanks a lot for sharing the Jenkins information. And on board level, there is a document we are working on to gather this type of information. So I think our next step there would be to combine what Jenkins is doing and what our communities want to have. Then we can bring that document to TOC once it is finalized, and once the community, as part of LFX, the current work group and TOC discussion, once we finalize that document, we can go back to legal with more complete information, both from Jenkins side, plus there may be things Jenkins is not looking, but our community, our projects want to collect, and then we get feedback from the legal once that work is completed. Andrea, you are muted, I think.
Oh, yeah, I'm muted. Sorry. Thanks, Paddy. No, I was just reading Cameron's comment from the chat that Spinnaker collects telemetry data as well. And Zep12 if others are looking to do the same. So that's great. Thanks, Cameron.
Yeah, let me know if you guys need any help.
Yeah, Cameron, can you send me the information about Spinnaker data collection so we can combine all that information together?
Totally, yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. Thanks.
Great. Any last question or comment on the second presentation? Well, thanks again, David and Christine, much appreciated you doing the presentation here. I think it was brilliant, very useful. This meeting is recorded, so the presentation the video will be available soon. So I'll share the link with you once it's available. Okay. All right, so moving on the agenda. Next item, I just wanted to briefly bring a status update on the Technical Oversight Committee, OKR. So what we presented last meeting I created a GitHub project where basically the 5 objectives are here, and then you can expand, and for each objective there are like key results. And then for this, then we can have a status and assignees, and we can have linked pull requests or linked items. And so the plan that I have is to, well, sync this with the roadmap that we have today, so to make sure that all the work that we are doing and that is in the roadmap is associated with some of these key results. And the other thing that is ongoing is to map this to CDF wide OKRs to make sure that we have a link between what we're doing as a TOC and the general direction and strategy of the CDF. Yeah, that's all I had on this. There is a question, comments. All right. So this is the next topic is SIG updates, and this is, I brought it back from last meeting. I think we didn't have time to discuss it. So the first point is about TOC sponsors. So the way special interest group are set up is that they're supposed to have a TOC sponsor, someone on the TOC that is sponsoring this SIG. And right now, I think most of our SIG, they don't have a sponsor because the original sponsor is not part of the TOC anymore, or, well, mainly that. So it would be good to have a sponsor assigned to each of these, like interoperability events, MLOps, and best practices SIGs. So if there are volunteers for sponsors, we can try and do it directly in this meeting. Otherwise, we can take it offline and make a call for sponsors.
I think we should take it offline and go and hunt down sponsors offline on that. I think it'll just be quicker and easier to get feedback from the individual SIGs. Because I think they may have an opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Steve. The other point I wanted to bring to the group is that the way SIGs are defined in the charter, their SIGs are expected to have like a regular communication to this group, to the TOC, and bring back like quarterly updates, have a roadmap designed for the interest group. And maybe that's something that I was suggesting we could have something like an end of year report to bring together all the quarterly updates and have a nice report at the end of the year, what happened and what was discussed and achieved by the special interest group. So yeah, so basically I would propose to kind of bring this back and maybe join some of the various SIGs to present these and ask to have some presentation similar to what we started with, project presentation, to have some presentation from the special interest group to this TOC meeting.
Would it make sense for the quarterly updates if we could do like a Google form or something like that, that they could just, we can ask them, you know, 5 questions that we want to find out from them, just to make the burden on them pretty light, but we still get the same information that we're to make decisions and stuff. Just an idea.
Yeah, I think the original format also from the charter talks about an update, not necessarily like a presentation. So yeah, that makes sense.
I'm kind of envisioning it just being these quarterly updates being pretty lightweight on the SIGs for them to work with.
Yeah, yes, it makes sense. Yeah, just want to make sure that we are kind of aware of what is going on with the different SIGs, and we can discuss it as a group. So, but I think like answers from this form would be sufficient. Just to put you on the spot, Steve, since you proposed this, I was wondering if you would be interested in drafting.
Yeah, you can put my name for an
initial
action.
form.
Yeah, you can do an action item for me on that.
Great, thanks. All right. Anything else on SIGs? Nope. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. I just wanted to bring back the assessing CDF project health topic. So last time we discussed project community metrics and project usage metrics. But I was thinking there are some other dimensions that would be good to consider, like user feedback and surveys, maybe. So information from users directly, not in the form of like anonymous telemetry, but like so sending around surveys, so generic feedback that we get from users. And another aspect that we could consider is to include in the project acceptance and graduation criteria some more requirements than we have today. Some maybe areas that could be interesting are like what the installation process for the tool looks like, what is the quality of the documentation. And it's open for more ideas. And one of the key results that is in the OKR is this one to basically establish a clear roadmap for graduation of 2 CDF projects. So I think that these would be a good fit for that area. But yeah, so I don't know, any comment on these?
I definitely think we should get a clarifier, what the road to graduation looks like. And there's probably a couple of those items on there, like, governance. Do they have a governing board? Do they have a maybe a security officer, or those types of things to determine the maturity of the group and the involvement? So I don't know what those should be, but I think we should have a conversation on it.
Oh, I think those are listed in the charters, in the. I can't remember if it's the governing board charter or if it's in the TOC charter.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because those definitions of what's needed for incubating versus graduating is defined somewhere.
Yeah, it is definitely defined. But I was wondering whether we could announce some of that based on some of this area, because I think we have the requirement about governance, we have the requirements about like having security, we have the OpenSSF badge. I don't think we have specific requirements about kind of user experience. So let me see if I can.
Yeah, Fatih just put it in the chat. It's the project lifecycle README.
Right.
It would be, it could be too much work, but it'd be kind of nice to know that a project is like 50% of the way there, and has achieved these items on the checklist. And if from a TOC point of view, that will kind of help us figure out how we can help them get them over to the line to the next level. I don't know how much work that would be, but it's just a way that we can kind of view where they're at.
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit on already written about it. Maybe we just spend some time and review this and just go through it and see if there's anything we want to add to it. I see that the OpenSSF best practice badge has been added to it. For example, I don't think that was there initially.
Yes, it might not have been there initially. It was there already in the case of Tecton graduation. So that's something that we did for Tecton, for instance.
So for example, I'm looking at it and I could almost say that based on the graduated status, Ortelius could graduate, but I don't think we would be ready, considering we just pretty much got our MVP ready and is out there, and we're just starting the adoption process. So I feel like there probably should be a little bit more in the acceptance criteria, as you indicated. You know, is there good documentation? You know, what is the does it have a community of adopters? We've done a lot of this. I'm just saying we wouldn't be, even though we might check off some of these bullet points, I don't think I would suggest that Ortelius is ready for graduation. Now, Tecton might be. Oh, that's right. Tecton to graduate.
Okay, so
maybe we just make it a topic of a future meeting.
Yeah.
To go over it as a group, and give it a thumbs up or thumbs down.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, about user feedback and surveys, I was wondering if there's something you can do as a TOC to help project kind of collect this information or run surveys from the users to learn more about the users, how the project is used, what are kind of common pain points, or
You know, surveys aren't well. People get pretty burnt out on surveys, but maybe you know, a number of case studies, written case studies, which also can be challenging because not a lot of companies will want to expose their tools that they're using. At least that's been our experience. Many of them will be happy to, but maybe we do user feedback in the form of you know, case studies that we can publish. I think that surveys and get a little old.
Actually, about the case studies, we launched the user stories program, and I think we had the first case study from Fidative published beginning of February, and we have 3 or 2 of them are in draft, and 3rd one is being written. So if any of you know an end user company using one of our projects or more of our projects, just reach out to us and we do our best to help them get their case studies published.
okay. All right. I think we are at the end of the agenda. We only have 1 minute left. Any last remark or question from anyone?
I just want to point out that we have our first LFX tools meeting on Monday. I'm not sure if all of the projects got notified that we were doing that. Fatih, who did we? I know Mark has been added, and I'm hoping that at least the project representatives have been added. And this is a working group, so it means it's not permanent. We're just trying to get some initial recommendations and requirements for the LFX team that we can push over.
Yeah, TOC members, Mark, and subscribers to groups mail list are included in the invite, but I can add the project representatives from the list we have on this document. So they
Yeah,
know.
it would be helpful if they knew
Yeah.
that it'd be great to have one person from each project on that working group.
Yeah. Yeah, I will add them to invite. Thanks, Tracy.
And that will be a
Great.
monthly meeting, so we're not being super aggressive about this, and hopefully we will gather most of them on discussions in the GitHub repo.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. And thanks, everyone. And thanks again, Christy and David, for your presentation, and see you next time.
So
Hey.
there's a question
Oh.
from Emil, the time of the next
Oh.
meeting, daylight saving, like are we sticking to 5 p.m. European, or because the public calendar shows it 1 hour later than our usual?
Right. I'm hoping
Oh,
for
for
it
the
to
next.
stay. So let's see. But let's see what you say.
Okay. So that
When-
would be on the 28th, right?
When Europe moves to daylight savings time, this will all sync up. We're in that weird 2-week period.
No, I think the meeting time shifts to 6 p.m. for Europe. It is on the calendar, public calendar.
Oh, okay. You're talking about something else. I'll be quiet.
Yeah,
Sorry.
like yeah, if you open the calendar, Andrea, sorry for taking everyone's time, but yeah, we need to update the meeting on public calendar.
Yeah. Yeah, let me see. So the meeting is not set in UTC, is that it's moving around basically whenever.
Yeah.
Do you have the link to the calendar?
Yeah, I
Andy?
put on the chat. It's on the chat, Zoom chat.
Oh, okay. All right. So 28th, right? So this is CDF Technical Oversight Committee is now marked as 6 p.m. rather than what used to be before 5 p.m. in European time.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, of course, I mean, I would propose to keep it as it is in European time, but I don't know if that works. Maybe I can, yeah. Not everyone is here now, so let's ask and
But I think historically we kept the meeting time same. We didn't follow UTC, we followed the local time zones. So this meeting is now happening, or next week it will happen 1 hour later for Pacific and other time zones as well. So pulling it back to 5 p.m. CET should bring it back to same time in Pacific and others as well.
Oh, okay. All right, then I'll change it back. All right, thanks. Thanks, Samuel, for bringing this up. All right. All right. See everyone next time then.
Nice seeing you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.